Hi, I'm Lisa Lunn from Shadow Valley Quilts. Today I'm going to share a tutorial with you for my Lincoln's Valentine quilt pattern. This is an easy, fun, jelly roll friendly quilt that goes together super quickly. I named it Lincoln's Valentine because all of the blocks are based on a simple log cabin design to make this heart shape. All the pieces, except for a few of the background pieces, are cut from 2.5-inch strips. This quilt looks great in Valentine colors, but it's actually a really versatile pattern, and I think it looks awesome in any color scheme. One quick word about fabric choice. If you want the hearts to really show up, just make sure there's a good contrast between your background fabric and the other colors. I'm going to be making the throw size, which is 68 by 68 inches. These are my fabrics. For the background fabric, I chose Kona Bone. And for the heart fabrics, I am using some fabrics from my stash. These are from the Moda French General Chateau de Chantilly line. I bought these a year ago. I'm not sure if they're still available, but they're all from that Chateau de Chantilly line from French General. Everything that we're going to cut from fabrics 2 through 5 is going to start in a 2.5-inch strip. In the pattern, I have it designated how many 2.5-inch strips you need from each fabric, depending on which size of quilt you're going to make. So we're going to start by just cutting a bunch of 2.5-inch strips from fabrics 2 through 5. Then from those strips, we're going to cut the correct size of pieces to make our log cabin blocks. Here we have all of our pieces from biggest to smallest. You can see they're all cut from 2.5-inch strips, except that background fabric piece. That one is a 4.5-inch square that we're going to start with to make our log cabin block. Now we're going to sew them together. Chain piecing works really well here. We're going to start with our 4.5-inch square. We're going to sew the smallest fabric 2 piece onto that 4.5-inch square. We'll press the seam allowance open on each piece, and then we're going to sew the next largest piece on to the side, following the diagram that's in the pattern. We'll press that open again, and we'll just continue in that manner, sewing from one side to the other. On the right side and then on the top, the right side and then on the top. We'll go from fabric 1, or I'm sorry, from fabric 2 to fabric 3 to fabric 4 to fabric 5. 2 pieces of each. So this is a very simple, I guess you could call it a half log cabin block because we're only sewing the strips of the colored fabric onto 2 sides of the block. For a full log cabin block, we'd be sewing them on all 4 sides. So after each set, after you sew the strip onto all of the blocks, we're going to press the seam allowance open. Give it a nice pressing so it's nice and flat, and then we're going to sew the next strip on. Super, super simple. So this is the way it grows. So when it's finished, we're going to trim it up, make sure it's 12.5 inches square. Now we're going to move on to the borders and the background fabric pieces. Here we have square A, square B, and square C. We're going to start with square B. We've cut two of them. We're going to cut these two squares in half once diagonally. So we're going to end up with 4 B triangles. Now we're going to move on to square C. We've cut 3 square C triangles. We're going to cut these in half twice diagonally. So we're going to end up with 12 C triangles. And then this is our big square A. We've cut 2 of these for the throw size. We're going to cut this in half twice diagonally as well. So we're going to end up with 8 A triangles. So we're going to use the A, B, and C triangles plus our sashing pieces to put together our quilt interior. So we're going to use the heart blocks, these 2.5-inch strips, and the A triangles to put together our first strips. We're going to line up the straight edges, and these tips of the triangles are going to overhang a little bit. We're going to line up the sashing pieces the same way. We've got the C triangles, the 2.5-inch strips, and the 2.5-inch squares. We have the straight edges lined up, and the triangle tips will hang over just a little bit. So we're going to sew these together using a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Then we're going to press the seam allowance open. Repeat with your sashing strip, sewing it together with the 1/4-inch seam and pressing it open. We're going to sew the sashing strip to the heart block strip by matching up the seams and pinning the seams. Sew it together with a 1/4-inch seam and press the seam allowance open. We're going to sew the strips together in the layout shown in the pattern. Now we're ready to start our borders. We're going to take all of our fabric 3 and fabric 1 2.5-inch strips, and we're going to sew them together end to end. The fabric 3 strips together and the fabric 1 strips together. We're going to sew them together end to end and then press the seam allowances open. We'll get one big long strip and then we're going to cut it to size. The exact dimensions are given in the pattern, but you can measure it against your quilt as well. We're going to put it up against the side of the quilt and cut it to the exact length of the side of the quilt. Then we'll pin it to each side of the quilt. We're starting with the fabric 3 border. Sew it to each side of the quilt with a 1/4-inch seam on both sides of the quilt, and then press the seam allowances towards the border. After you have both sides sewn on and pressed nicely, we're going to cut the top and the bottom pieces. They're going to be, they should be exactly the same length as the side pieces. If you want to double check, you're going to lay it out across the top of the quilt and make sure that you're measuring it to the full width of the quilt interior, not to the seam line. Now we're going to sew our fabric 5 2.5-inch squares to the edge of the border, one on each end of that top and bottom border. We'll press the seam allowances open, and then we're going to pin that border to the top and bottom of the quilt. We'll sew those two borders in place and then press. Now we're ready to add the fabric 1 border, and it's going to be exactly the same method. Once both borders are on, we have a finished quilt top. I quilted mine using the feathered spiral panto from Long Arm League. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial of the Lincoln's Valentine quilt. If you'd like to make your own, you can pick up the pattern at shadowvalleyquilts.com. And I'd really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.